Scientists have been warning us for a long time that the Arctic is heating up, and it's according to a new study, the Arctic Report Card, it's getting worse. So I'm going to talk to Dr. Kent Moore, who's a professor of atmospheric physics at the University of Toronto, about that. Welcome to the interview, Kent.
Hello.
So how bad is it in the Arctic? I mean, we've been hearing this for a long time. Is it one of those things, where it's just another, iteration of this? It's a little incremental worsening, or is this now we have to be really concerned?
Well, anything when you deal with the climate system, you're dealing with averages over long periods of time. And so the Arctic has been warming, and it's been warming, for the last 100 years or so. It's warming at a faster rate than the rest of the Earth. So that's a really important thing to remember, is that when we talk about, for instance, the Earth is warmed by 1 degree since 1990, the Arctic is warmed by probably 2 degrees since 1900. The Arctic is warmed by 2 degrees since 1900. So there's this process called Arctic amplification, which is essentially this characteristic of the Arctic, that it's warming faster than the rest of the Earth. And so again, the record temperature in June 2020 is just another indication of how warm it's getting, and the fact that the Earth is warming up. And so it's not super surprising. What's probably more shocking, actually, although this peak temperature of 38 degrees in June, what was actually probably more shocking to sort of the climate community was from January till June. The Siberia was the warmest on record. So it wasn't just one day, it was the whole winter and early spring and summer. And that's actually kind of more surprising to us, because one day is just one day, right? But when you have 6 months of above average temperatures and the warmest 6 months on record, that's really, I think, the more telling statistic, just how warm it's getting.
Now, some of the things that scientists are noting are reductions in sea ice and snow cover, retreating glaciers, thawing permafrost, that sort of thing. Is this an indicator that we're at a tipping point? I mean, I live in British Columbia, and this year we're having these crazy atmospheric river storms. That seems to be a tipping point, a climate change tipping point on the West Coast. Is this now a climate change tipping point in the Arctic?
So we talk about tipping points as sort of a transition to a different state. I don't think we're seeing that yet in the Arctic. We won't see that until we lose all the essentially sea ice. That would be the tipping point that happens. But again, this is just a warning that we are getting. It's getting really warm up there. One of the concerns that people have, and one of the reasons why the Arctic is warming so rapidly, is because of feedback loops. And for instance, you mentioned melting permafrost. Well, permafrost has in it a lot of carbon stored, organic carbon. And so when you melt permafrost, you release that carbon into the atmosphere. And that's an amplification. And that's one of the reasons why the Arctic is warming so fast. So I wouldn't say it's a tipping point. We're not there yet. But again, we're getting close to that. We'll lose the summer sea ice in the Arctic in about 20 or 30 years. And that'll be the real dramatic transition. But again, this is just a wake-up call to us that the Arctic is getting really warm, and it was really, really warm in June 2020.
So if we have 20 to 30 years before we see the dramatic increases, it's not like on year 19 we can suddenly wake up and go, oh, maybe we should do something about this. So even if we are reducing emissions and, trying to keep global warming to 1.5 C by 2100, it almost sounds like these changes you're talking about are inevitable.
Well, again, so what you have to think about it is that we now have a state of the climate system, and that state gave us this really, really warm 6 months, okay? So if we don't do anything else, we will continue to have these warm periods in the Arctic, similar to what we had today. If we continue to emit carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, they'll be getting more extreme. So again, we baked in, if you like, a certain amount of warming, and that amount of warming will give us processes like this. It won't, we've lost probably 75% of the ice in the Arctic, and that, if we, again, shut off carbon emissions tomorrow, it would equilibrate soon, in maybe 20 or 30 years, to that level. but again, we're far from the climate equilibrium that we were, let's say, in 1900, and that's, I think, what the real concern is.
Well, any other final thoughts on where we're going with Arctic warming, Kent? Have we got any good news here?
No, I don't think so. I think the one thing we have to remember is when we talk about, permafrost loss and sea ice loss, they're real dramatic impacts both for the ecosystems up there and also for indigenous communities. I mean, the people who live in Siberia, aren't used to having heat waves, and so this is a real shock to them. Of course, in the Canadian Arctic, the Inuit are really concerned about the loss of sea ice, because again, sea ice is their road in the winter, where they, to hunt or whatever. And so these losses of sea ice or changes in the Arctic have impacts on people who live there and also on the ecosystems. Of course, is that what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. The Arctic, sea ice in the Arctic acts as an air conditioner for the planet, because the sea ice is bright, it reflects radiation back to space. And so when we melt sea ice, we're replacing sea ice with open water, which is dark and it absorbs it. So what happens in the Arctic impacts the whole Earth, okay? And so we have to remember is that the warming we're seeing in the Arctic is also impacting us who live in mid-latitudes directly, because again, the mid-latitudes are warming, but also the changes in the Arctic are changing weather patterns. And they also are impacting the weather that we see in the mid-latitudes. So the Earth is really connected, and we just can't forget about the Arctic because it's far away and not many people live there. It turns out it's a crucial part of the climate system, and we need to deal with the Arctic and understand the Arctic is warming.
Kent, always appreciate your insights. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you.